Hi, I'm Annalisa.
I'm Maggie.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Leah.
We're a team of mental health professionals from Unleashed Counseling.
Welcome to Bibliotherapy, a self-help book club podcast. Let's book it.
Hello, all.
Hi.
Hello.
How is everyone doing?
Well, the sun is shining, so I am happy.
Yes, exactly.
It's a beautiful thing to see. So, today on our third podcast, we're going to talk about the first half of Didn't See That Coming by Rachel Hollis. She's personally one of my favorite authors, and I'm really excited to hear what you guys thought about the first half of this book, because I know how I feel about it. I'm loving it, but what do you guys think?
I didn't know that she was the one that wrote Girl Wash Your Face. I've heard so much about that book, and I'm always like, I need to read that because I need to do that. I need to remind myself that that needs to be done. I need to wash my face. So I'm like, oh my gosh. And so now I need to like go and read her other books because I had no idea that it was the same person.
I was really skeptical. I will admit I have one of her other books sitting next to my bed, and I've picked it up several times and just haven't been able to get through it. And I also follow her on somewhere, Facebook, I think, and I think she's lovely. I think she's such a cool person, such a cool influencer and businesswoman and role model. But the other book, I just couldn't get into it. So I was like, all right, I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to have an open mind. And I love it. I'm so glad that this is the one on the roster for today because I've just really enjoyed it so far.
Oh, yeah, that's it's funny that, well, Maggie, you mentioning about Girl Wash Your Face, because yes. um and also, yeah, like, Lisa, I've had, with this book in particular, I wanted to read it for like a variety of reasons. One, because it's her new book, but also because I think it like just makes sense to read it right now.
Yeah.
And at first, when I started reading it, like, I love how she writes, but I think like I wasn't in the right like headspace to start reading it. So initially, when I first got it, I read like the first part of it and just put it down because I just, there's more things to focus on, and B, I don't think I really wanted to start like looking at, because like, for people who are able to see the front cover, the second part of the title is Putting Life Back Together When Your World Falls Apart.
Mm-hmm.
Which can sound kind of daunting when you see that on the front of a book.
Yeah.
So I was like, yes, this seems like something to read, but at the same time, I don't know if I'm in this place to read it. So I'm happy that you guys are getting into it, and I'm having a much better time getting through it.
Yeah. I I think it's interesting because you do really have to be in the right frame of mind to sit down and read a self-help book, especially when you are an avid reader in other genres. I love fiction and fantasy and escape, and this is like real life, real advice coming from a person who's been through it. And I think we've all been through something, in our lives that's, kind of close to when your world falls apart, but it might not be the end of the world. So it's like easy to relate, but it's also it was easy to read. It kind of read like fiction in a way. It was easy to get through. And she does really have a couple really good like one-liners in there. Are we stuck here forever? No, not stuck, but for a moment we must be still. I'm
Oh,
like,
I underlined that too. Yes.
we do that a lot, Lisa. We we underline the same things. I was like, oh my gosh, like being still and taking a moment and just like taking things in and really being there and being present. It's just something that I think a lot of people forget about.
And the thing is, it can be scary to sit still when you've experienced trauma, when you're going through grief. And she makes the case, you know, in the beginning, that with the pandemic and the quarantine, we're all sort of going through some grief right now, some loss. And so sitting still, you're allowing those really tough feelings to come up. And that's hard for a lot of people. It's hard for me, and I, you know, I'm a therapist, right? But it's so worth it. And I think that's her point. Like, if you just let yourself be still and experience the good, you'll also get to a place where you can experience the bad, then you'll get to a place where you can experience the good again.
Yeah, no, and I think I also like the fact that she not only goes from the lens of if you've experienced grief or loss or someone hurting you, when you're in the position of doing something that might have hurt somebody else or have put you in
Yeah.
a position of pain or hurt. And the one thing that she really brings up is the fact of her choosing to get a divorce
Hmm.
and some of the responses that she had gotten from some of her readers and fans of, I want my money back from listening to you talk about these things because they deem her a liar for doing something, about being unhappy in the relationship. And she has, speaking of one-liners, this one that really stood out of, I'm willing to be the villain in someone else's story if it means I can be the hero of my own. And I think like that
Hmm.
is the perfect way of explaining it, of like, really, you have to do what is going on in your life that's going to benefit you, right? So if it means leaving a job that you hate, and even for the sake of Maggie's making a face, so like, and I've done it too, of like, this doesn't serve me, I can't stay here. And even if there's people that want me to stay, or I need that financial security, like, I'll find something else. This is really getting bad. If it's a relationship that people are unhappy with you leaving, if it's changing your major in college, like, whatever it is, if it serves you, then, and it's not in the fact of you're not purposely hurting anybody else, you're trying to better yourself.
Hmm.
But also in that same chapter of like saying, one bad thing or doing a bad thing doesn't make you a bad person.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or having the bad thoughts doesn't make you a bad person. I think that's a really good point that she makes too.
I don't know if it's in the same chapter, but soon after that, she also talks about um, privilege, and I was really pleased, and I put a bunch of exclamation points next to that section, and it was in the context of the quarantine. And she said, like, you know, at first, early in March and April 2020. She was feeling like, oh, this is miserable. I can't believe this. Like, I'm nervous. I'm scared. Unhappy. Whatever. I'm probably putting some words in her mouth. That's how I was feeling. And then she realized that she needed to change her perspective. And she acknowledged that being able to stay in quarantine is a privilege, like not being a frontline worker where you have to put yourself, in harm's way. Um, not being in a place where like you just don't have the means to stay at home. And I was like, fair point. And like, that's one way to change your perspective. I mean, you don't always have to compare pain in order to change your perspective, but like, there's a place, I think, in here to talk about privilege too, right? Like being able to say, okay, this is not for me. I'm gonna go ahead and like take charge of my own life, and I can do that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And especially with in the context of quarantine, like from my perspective, in the beginning, I was still going into work. And I had worked because I was working at like a partial IOP kind of setting. And then after a while, as things kind of rolled out, we were not able to stay open. We had to go completely virtual. So I was able to stay home, but my partner was not. He went into work like every other frontline worker did, as a pharmacist, right? So
Wow.
he, I kind of had the perspective of both worlds. And So in my head, I'm like, man, this sucks. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. But then I'm watching him go out to work. And, he's, dealing with a lot of like different sick people. And then it kind of shifted that perspective of, man, like, this is, it not only puts him at risk, but puts me at risk too. And like kind of really trying to figure out like, all right, we are able to have an income. We are able to have a roof over our heads. We like, there is that privilege too of, having that security. But also being able to recognize some of the other feelings that might come up with that, of like that fear or the uncertainty that makes is really driving a lot of us crazy at this point, because it is a pretty prolonged experience of uncertainty, that us as humans, we like that security, we like knowing what's going on. So I do like that perspective of that privilege, and also the point that she makes about perspective in general, of it's your point of view of what life looks like. So like that was something that really kind of like stood out to me. I was literally waiting for an oil change on my car while I was reading it. And I was like, I'm sitting there and I have like my pen, and I'm like underlining and putting arrows, and people are probably looking at me like, what is she doing?
Right. Why is she writing all over that book?
Yeah, right. Like, and I was like into it, like, so
Aggressively.
yeah, like aggressively writing in a hardcover book, at a car dealership. That's fine. But like it really hit home of like, wow, yeah, like there is that point of perspective of, okay, this sucks, or like my life is, in shambles because of this, or, I've been going through this for X amount of time, and there, you have so many thoughts. But then to kind of take a step back and be like, well, wait a second, I'm the writer of my story here. I can have that perspective shift and be able to get myself in a different direction.
Hey, listeners. After you're done listening, check out our awesome guide that is jacked full of ideas to practice self-care. Here's why you should grab up your free guide now. Because we love you. Because you deserve a break. Because if you continue to go at the pace you're going, you'll burn out. Because you may actually have forgotten how to do self-care. What are you waiting for? Head over to selfcaretips.org/free guide and give yourself permission to do that thing that makes you happy. Oh yes. Okay, so her and her friends were basically going to do a juice cleanse. Who designed this plan for us? Satan, I'm sure, is such a good line. But she does this juice cleanse where you're just, constantly starving. And she is talking about how she's sitting at her, what did she say, like her kitchen counter, and she was gassy, because obviously when you do a juice cleanse, it's gonna make you a little gassy, and she did the lean, and I pushed again, and promptly shot diarrhea out of my body like a heat-seeking missile, and I died. Like,
I was so shocked I couldn't consciously understand what had just occurred. I was a woman in my 30s and I had just pooped my pants at the kitchen counter aggressively. Like she's a really skillful writer. I mean,
yeah.
she's writing a book about grief and loss, and she's making us like howl with laughter about
Yes,
diarrhea.
that's exactly what I was gonna say, because we go from laughing to those parts like when she's talking about the death of her brother, that's so raw, and it's not only like raw to like listen to her tell those stories, but it's also raw to read if you've been through a loss as well. It's gonna be 4 years, I think, now that my dad passed away, and it was like reading that, it was like reading my own thoughts on the matter, which was like crazy. That it never, grief does not go away, and it's not something that you just get over and one day you wake up and you're like, oh, okay, it's time to move on, it's time to move forward, I'm not allowed to be sad anymore. It pops up in your life like, I don't even know how to explain it. It just shows up like randomly.
Yeah.
And it can really hit hard, especially on those days where it hits randomly, and it's been like, you've been going, and you finally come to a halt where you think about that, and then you basically just crash, because you have to come, like she says it, you have to come face to face with that kind of stuff, and you have to really acknowledge what you're feeling before you can acknowledge what you want to be feeling. That's one of like the coolest things that she talks about, is how you have to acknowledge who you are in order to grow and to change. Essentially, I loved when she talked about the part about changing, and when people in your life say that to you, how your only reply should be thanks, I'm working on it. And that reminded me of a particular person in my life when my father passed away. Just a few short months after, this friend was basically like, get over it, get up
Oh,
off your butt, and um if you don't want to be better, you're never going to get better. And I'm like, I was so shocked, because I was like, wait, y- everybody grieves differently, and everybody is allowed to grieve in their own way. And it was just a really hard hit when that happened. And those those are the kinds of people that have not experienced loss and that have not been through it. And you really it's something you have to go through. But having uh not having that support from somebody in like the weakest of times is really, really difficult. And that's exactly how I felt reading it when she was talking about her brother. It was just it's really, it's a relatable book. Like, it really is. I loved reading this.
And that's like kind of going back to the juice cleanse, like the end of it. There was a thing I underlined of like how she like eloquently goes from talking about pooping her pants to everyone's experience of loss is deeply individual, as is their decision on how to heal.
Mm,
And that's something that, like, kind of thinking about like the losses in my own life, of like knowing that, well, each loss I experience differently, right? But because I was in different parts of my life, right? My aunt passed, I was, younger. When my uncle passed 2 years later, I was in a different phase of my life. And then 2 years ago, when my cousin died, like, I was again in a different season. But I, at some point, go back to my usual way of coping, which is, just kind of like going a little bit more internal and like withdrawing, right? And like not wanting to talk about things. So if like, some people think, oh, a juice cleanse, this is going to make me healthy, and I'm going to, this is going to be great, and I'm going to have an enlightening experience. And then like her friend's husband was like, basically, no,
yeah.
I would
I'm
never
not
do a juice
interested.
cleanse. Yeah, I'm not doing that. Right. And like, you can be on both sides of the spectrum, right? Of like, oh, I'm going to do this amazing thing, and I'm on this journey, and this is going to be great. And then you have
and you got to
somebody,
join me.
yes, like everyone has to do this because this is the way to get to like the, end game. And then you have another person who's like, absolutely not. That doesn't sound like a great idea. Like, I
The
foresee the
pyramid
future.
scheme.
Yes. Like, I can see myself like pooping my pants at my own kitchen table, and I'm not having it, right? But like, you can be on like both sides, and you can be at both sides at certain points in your life. So
Yeah.
it's just like so. And like, honestly, again, I'm sitting having an oil change in my car, and I'm like crying laughing at
Pooping
like,
your pants.
yeah, like I'm like, I all I saw was juice cleanse, and I was like, I know exactly where this is going. And then I ended up like tearing up crying when I was reading the end of it, because I was like,
Mhm.
oh my God, Maggie, kind of like similarly to what you were saying of, people saying about like, oh, like you should be over it. Like my aunt's been gone for, oh my gosh, I mean, for a long time. And there is a song, September, that like, is a very popular song. And
By
I
Earth,
think
Wind and
Earth, Wind
Fire,
and
that
Fire.
one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Every time that song comes on, I immediately think of her.
Mm-hmm.
And like I can just like see her like, singing along in a wooden spoon, like having the time of her life. And like that's something that like I will never forget about her. No one can tell me that that can't make me upset still. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
Yeah.
it is something that's going to continue to happen, like it's I see a bulldog, I think of my cousin because he loved bulldogs, and his like end goal was to retire and have like a bulldog farm, right? So like the fact that like I can still think of those things and those people still meant something to me, they still existed.
Mm-hmm.
And like this is my way of healing, of thinking of some of these things and keeping them like alive in my own ways, and coping with the loss. So it's just it was one of those moments of like, and why I love reading her specifically is because she can have me absolutely laughing to the point of tears, and then in like the next page I'm like sobbing because she makes such a huge point, that like it just really like hits that one button where I'm like, she went there, like
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah, and her honesty, right? She's
Yeah.
so open and honest and real, authentic.
Mm-hmm.
She's authentic about herself and her writing. And that's like part of what makes it so appealing. It's like, yes, I can relate to that. So thank you to both of you for sharing such like intimate details of your life. And it makes me think everybody should read this book, not just the people who are trying to overcome a loss, but also the people around them, right? The friends and family who want to be good supporters, right? Who want to
Yeah.
be a good partner or friend. Like, also read it so that you can relate, as best you can, even if you haven't experienced the same loss.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely. It's attempting to put yourself in someone else's shoes, even though you've never walked that path.
Yeah.
It's, and Nicole, with the things that remind you of the people you've lost, those are the beautiful things that they would want you to remember about them, which is another thing she touches on. She just says, that one person, when you think of the word loss and that one person pops into your head, they would not want you to be sad. They would not want you to be guilt, if feel guilty, nothing like that. They would want you to remember those moments that they remind you of them. And it's a really interesting thing when she says those things about grief and loss, because you really are keeping the memory of someone else alive by doing that, by just shutting down and letting go and moving on and moving forward. You're kind of leaving those people behind, and those people also helped you grow. And um again, just like keeping their memory alive, it's a beautiful thing.
yeah, she mentions that in like the 5 W's
Mm-hmm.
and the one
Mm-hmm.
H.
And the age.
Yeah, I mean, side note, it was kind of funny that she mentioned that because I always thought that in school of like, we say the
Me
five
too.
W's, but like how? Come on. I mean,
Right.
Poor little H.
Yeah, you
yeah,
just threw that in there. Like,
yeah, right. There's a W in it, but it doesn't start with one. Come on. Like let's get this real. But like I like how she kind of went through each one, and the one like that, like who, right, like triggered by hurt, right? The one thing she says is, you are not defined by the pain they inflicted, you're defined by what you turned that pain into. So like even thinking of like, if somebody were to do something to you specifically, right, and then like using that pain to move on. But also that can go to grief and loss too, right? The pain of losing somebody, and using that to also fuel yourself to do other things in the future, right? Like those people that I know I've lost, I think about as like, those experiences prepared me to talk to clients that have had loss in various ways. That, my family members, that, being there to support them, like, friends that they experience a loss that I'm able to support, and not that they would experience it in the same way that I do, but I at least had the experience to call upon to know how I felt, and, try and be there as a support, and not necessarily like, like thoughts and prayers, move on. And like, having that like kind of thought of like, oh, just like get over it. It's been, some time after. So I like that point of, not wallowing in the pain, not staying in the pain, not keeping it actual pain, right? But using whatever that was and moving you forward. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Let us know what you thought of the first half of Didn't See That Coming by Rachel Hollis, and we'll continue this discussion on the second half of the book in about 2 weeks. In the meantime, don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at Unleashed Counseling.